Good evening, members of faculty and administrative and our reporting board. Today I'll be presenting my Educational Leadership Action Research Project, which has cumulative through my clinical field experience from EDL 517 to EDL 590. Under the direct mentorship of Ms. Johnson, our administrator in charge of our freshman operations at Olympia High School. I investigated how integrated administrative framework can be stabilized through clinical freshman transition year or critical freshman year. The project seeks to replace reactive crisis containment with proactive data-driven systems that move students superficially and compliance and authentic cognitive engagement. As school leaders, we know that freshman year is a make or break milestone for high school completion. When students hit the wall due to abstract content demands or rigorous campus culture, failure rates spike. Too often, traditional trained content area teachers resort to textbook-driven competencies models that maintain order. Unfortunately, this fails to target the root of skill deficient, creating a compounding cycle of chronic absences, behavior fractions, and loss of credit. We must understand these specific bottlenecks to shift our school culture and reactive containment to proactive support. This is an educational leadership portfolio. It's just an extra PDF file that I've created for when I introduce myself to my students, if I have them in my additional class, or if I have to give a short presentation to the administration. We just copy the link and then open the link. To address this issue, my research scope focused on precise intervention, pairing hard cognitive credit tracking with soft quantitative students monitoring checklists. So these students will get a checklist in the beginning. If they're in that threshold, we have a conversation about what's happening, why they're skipping class, why they're not in class, why they're misbehaving, or what's happening within that class of why we're not performing so well. The objective was to build professional development loops to empower teachers to use asset-based, cultural responsive pedagogy rather than defaulting to punitive discipline write-ups. Specifically, I set out a systematic tracking performance across the year to optimize a weekly monitoring checklist and cross-referencing behavior data like tardies with actual academic outcomes to create tailored deficient student pathways. So in other words, this is a chart that shows the student. I didn't zoom in because this is live. So we have student ID numbers, the student, how many tardies, what they got in trouble for, whether what any infraction was, cutting class, hanging in the bathroom, disrupting the class, being suspended, ISS, which is in-school suspension, and it charted by color after they met the checklist, and we spoke to them. What was the next step for them to do to get off this list? The red are the high flyers, or orange are people that have kind of calmed down. The whites have now basically taken themselves off the list, and the green has done a phenomenal job and they actually got themselves an award. As an educator leader, I can't rely on just intention alone. Our work must be really grounded. It has to be theoretically grounded. This project is synchronize the four pillars. First, Craig, action research cycle forms our operational framework. Second, the FOES PLC model, which is to ensure our data analysis and the collaborative building um, collective our teachers' efficiency. So when we have our PLCs on those during the week, we are comparing data from one quarter to the next, or a couple weeks to the following week. And third, we draw from Mr. Gay as well as Mr. Alam and Paris to implement cultural responsive assets based off of their values and their language learning and heritage speaking. Not everybody speaks the same, not everybody works the same, so we're trying to find a common ground to make sure everybody's on the same page. Finally, utilizing the data model to dismantle the data anxiety among our staff of being told to change the way we teach, change the way we do this, change the way we do that, to ensure feedback loops are highly visible and accessible. So we take their feedback from what's working, what's not working, and we put it together. So we're all speaking the same language. This is our problem statement, where I broke down the content, precise, support, and our goals. To clearly define our problem statement, our freshman students are high stakes, transitional, traditional, textbook heavy instruction often lead to dangerous patterns. Students often appear to be super physical and competent, sitting quietly, or they have a hard time sitting quietly or staying engaged, which leads to escalations as far as going back and forth with the teacher or back and forth with a student, which causes disruption in the class. This is a problem driven by three main causes: lack of teaching and training, an asset-based literacy with administrative system that reacts to crisis rather than managing the transition. Our goals are to implement multi-attribute data and our transitional system paired with weekly monitoring checkups replace those subjective guesswork to data backed interventions. Here's our core research questions. To guide this action research, I established three core research questions. The first looks like a quantitative side, how the tracking data via multiple attribute chart informs our administrative decisions. The second looks almost the same, but it's our weekly monitoring checklist that impacts the shift in passive competencies and to be active and cognitive engagement. How we get the kids back into the flow. And third, focus on leadership and professional development. Once we teach our staff and ourselves, myself, how to implement these things. As the chart I showed before, that's how we got more white and more green students to now be more present and more presentable in class. Once we utilize the textbooks and how to relate them to the real world, the kids are more engaged instead of just looking at a book and answering questions. Here's a broken down of the blueprint that we have, demonstrating the quantitative spikes of our attendance drops, failing grades can be recommended through targeting quantitative monitoring check-ins. So we watch the D's and F's for these students and get on top of them before they start falling off and not attending class. Shifting from just yelling and sending them right to detention, finding out what's the frustration, why they're having such a hard time in the class. I noticed out of 663 freshman students, only 61 students that had 50 or more tardies were in February 2026. By May 5th, we checked again, and for any student had more than 15 tardies received an infraction. So we had a tremendous drop once the check-ins were put in place. In conducting this study, my role was threefold: planning leader, observer, and centralizer. I served as a strategic bridge between high-level district policy and everyday classroom support. I also designed a data collection of agricultural shadowing discipline procedures in the dean's office, mentoring the checklists, and cross-referencing students' voices through their grades. And I saw the numbers spike to actually go down. This works placed through our administrative complex and high trafficking transition zones at Olympia High School, Freshman Academy Division. Covering core academic subjects, which are strict discipline. Tiers range from the pass, which is our positive suspension alternative, up to a level 4, or expulsion procedures. So we monitor those kids from the beginning to the next following quarter. Those that were failing, those were in constant pass, going through the checklist, mentoring them and watching them grow and succeeding in their classrooms. Part of the roles were listed here. High traffic zones were the hallways, which was part of our job to look in the hallways. The courtyards, they had a certain amount of time to get from the courtyard to the classroom. Monitoring the restrooms, making sure no one's inside the restroom smoking or skipping class. And then a display office and the PLC rooms. Participant selection replied on perceived and sampling. We identified freshmen showing early at risk and indicators across quarter 1 through quarter 4, baseline data, and placed them into a mentoring loop, which is the chart that I showed in the previous slide. ethically protecting these students from paramount. We secured the formal district and parental consent, completing decoupled our research tracking from officials, public academic records. We enforced universal data masking, converting all students, identifying into randomized alpha code. So basically put them all in alphabetical order, a numeric order, and put them from worst to last. So our production launch will be quarter 1. About 10,000 users, and milestone will be quarter 2. Strategic partnership in quarter 3, and our campaign launch will be in quarter 4. And these are the plans written down, broken into pieces. Here's an example of the weekly check-in list. It has everything that from the information of what happened, what the infraction was, what we plan on doing, why they were in this situation, and what we're going to do going forward. Our journal research designs a mixture of methods of action approach, which is the ideal educational leadership because it based rigor, legally defensible metric, and flexible empathetic tools. This data collection and matrix outline for the 4 primary streams: the quad, which is our baseline, our historical, our administrative, and reasonable suspicious checklist. This data is gathered through Friday afternoon through the weekly monitoring checkup list and bi-weekly share taking feedback string collecting during the Department of PLC procs. So we have our administrative log, our historical log, our weekly monitoring, and our stakeholders. Level 4 infractions, substance alerts, chain of custody, student ID credit, deficient GPA course, failure alerts, our tragedy shift, missing assignments, tardies, tears, and reflections. And then we have our peer support, data comfort, and fidelity tracking. This is how we will collect this information, and this is how frequent we'll do these things. This timeline lays out a 7-week action research cycle. Week 1 is dedicated to the baseline collection of environmental diagnostics, where we are mapping out our risk tiers. Week 2 through week 5 will serve as our active implementing phase, where mentors met with the students every Friday to complete their checklist. And week 6, I will transition to intensive data analysis, transcribing interviews, coding, quantitative feedback, and generation visual data charts. Finally, on week 7, I focus on strategic stakeholder diminishing, bringing out findings back to leadership and faculty so we can drive our school for improvement. So we'll meet all together based off of all this information, put it together, and it'll give the feedback back to our staff. Our data analysis plan was designed to prevent cognitive overload for our stakeholders. For our qualitative data, we are organized attendance, assignments, and grades into localization spreadsheet to mark our students, improve their same or declining. For our quantitative data, immersive myself to text to using the inactive coding or to capture reoccurring phrases, and emotional expressions. When they performed all through the triangulation process, cross-referencing these cognitive codes, this district cognitive data spikes. For instance, when we're mapping out the improvement and assignment submission directly against the specific students, survey themes regarding teacher-led literacy support. So these are broken up into 4, explaining how we're going to improve these numbers. So our triangular 2 main themes emerge. Theme 1 is revealed as a sharp divergency between competency and authentic engagement. Our structural administrative controls like proactive hallway supervision and strict restroom protocols were highly successful and stabilized the physical environment and reduced the downtime. However, we fell into the competency trap. The physical presence does not guarantee learning is happening. Students frequently sat quietly and submitted low effect work while remaining completely disengaged. Authentic cognitive engagement only occurred when the teacher shifted away from the textbook driven instruction and integrated student choice for cultural response models. Theme 2 is the curriculum redundancy and bottlenecks. Theme 2 identifies several academic bottlenecks caused by curriculum redundancy and practical among our fluent, bilingual, and heritage language speakers. Our qualitative coding captures the persistent frustration and summarized by the fluent student segment. I already know this. Our cognitive data verified that these students were often placed in industrial language courses that completely ignored their existing skills. The curricular mismatch didn't accelerate them. Instead, it bored them, and triggered them to cognitive tardiness. So they weren't learning anything, didn't help them, so they got bored and they started to skip classes. Students simply refused to complete the redundant assignments. They were not effective. In the conclusion drawn from this project determined that true school improvement requires a dual layered approach. The administrative controls the tight documentation, like using reasonable suspicion checklists during high stakes levels for substances and investigations, and entirely necessary to guarantee campus safety and maintain legal defensibility. However, these reactive measures merely establish a baseline on competency. They cannot drive academic achievement. To move the needle, our students' motivation and our instruction pathways must be asset-based. Tools like our weekly monitor checklist transforms isolated numbers into cohesive narrative and academic recovery. As with any rigorous action research cycle, Our findings raise several critical questions for the future study. First, regarding our logistics quality, how can restructured district rubrics restructure district rubrics to measure our ELLs students' academic growth without penalizing them for region and dialectal various very native of their native language. So why should they be defaulted, or why would they get hit for dialogical variations for their native language? So why should they be penalized for not having a hard time translating or reverting from their second language? Second, regarding our substantiality to those positive PLC cultures maintaining their momentum over multiple years, or do decay without intense administrative oversight. And finally, the last one, what specific coaching do our traditional trained and non-certified teachers need to be comfortable to stay away from the textbook driven models? To build on these findings, our continuous school improvement plan targets these three specialized domains. Immediately, we will establish specialized curriculum pathways working with Ms. Johnson and the World Language Department to build micro credentialing profiles that let heritage speakers bypass the redundant content. Strictly, we will operationalize our cross-departmental research PLCs focused on continuous empirical data analyzing protocols. And then financially, we will pitch a traditional way for unfunded tuition discounting, where the school absorbs scholarships cost as a budget loss. We will launch a cross-financial committee to execute this funding. Gail putting these receipts into restrict scholarship funds to protect our operational budget. So we're going to separate these budgets and get the things that we need to help our students rather than saying it's against the school. To ensure this project serves as a catalyst for the bordering educational achievement, are dismantling our plans targets for district audiences. We will deliver administrative and financial briefings to the school board using revenue tracking mathematics to prove the visible and funding scholarship pools. We will present to the students' work samples directly to our faculty teams to build a collective efficiency around the daily vocabulary routines like Freyr's models. We will host interactive community forums using bilingual data summarizing to co-design transparent communication with their families. And then finally, we will share our multimedia and brief across our professional digital networks to connect to our global body and educational leadership practice. Thank you, and I am happy to open the floor for any questions. Here's our core references. Thank you. So my name, email address. Thank you, Mr. Dr. Williams.